My wife took the money I had put away for my operation and used it to go on a trip with the person she'd been seeing behind my back. I can hardly believe I'm even putting these words down, but I have to get it off my chest. Perhaps getting this out there will help me understand things better, or at least prevent someone else from having to go through this nightmare that I've been stuck in for the past few weeks. Here's what happened. A month ago, I opened my eyes in the hospital, disoriented, frightened, and in more pain than I'd ever experienced. My surgery was scheduled for that morning. It was a procedure I had been diligently saving for more than a year, and I was going to pay for it myself. And it wasn't like I had a choice in the matter. I suffer from a long-term illness that makes everyday life awful, and this operation was supposed to get me back to normal and allow me to have a life again, to be honest. The strange thing was, when I inquired with the nurse why the surgery hadn't gone ahead, she just told me that it had been called off the day prior. I just thought there'd been some kind of mix-up, like a scheduling problem or maybe some issue with insurance. But the second I looked at my phone and saw an email from the hospital confirming the cancellation, which wasn't something I'd done, I felt sick. Somebody had contacted them the day before and called it off in my name. It wasn't me, and it was absolutely no mistake. I phoned my wife, the woman I've been with for 6 years and the only person I could trust to assist me with the practical aspects of the surgery. No response. I sent her a text, nothing. I even called her parents to find out if she was there, no luck. At that moment, I thought maybe she was just tied up or sleeping, so I didn't freak out. Not yet, anyway. I have to admit, the situation took a turn for the strange when the hospital administrator I talked to said the surgery payment had failed. It seemed the bank transaction I'd arranged to cover the operation, a transfer I'd painstakingly reviewed multiple times weeks earlier, was rejected the day before the surgery got called off. All the money I'd accumulated vanished. I honestly felt like I might vomit. A little background might help. For the last year, I'd been working like crazy to put away money for this surgery. We're not wealthy, and most of the cost wasn't covered by our insurance, so every single dollar was critical. I eliminated every unnecessary expense, no restaurant meals, no buying new clothes. I even dropped all my streaming services. Rachel, my wife, was incredibly encouraging, or at least that's what I believed. She repeatedly comforted me, telling me we'd get through this together and that I would feel much better once it was done. I completely relied on her. She helped me budget, kept tabs on the account where we kept the surgery funds, and even drove me to my pre-op visits. Because of all this, when I discovered the payment had been declined, my first assumption wasn't that she had taken the money. Truthfully, I believed I made a mistake somehow. Perhaps I made a typo in the transfer, or the bank had found something suspicious. But when I went online to check my account, I saw a huge withdrawal 2 days prior to the surgery. $15,000. It was all gone, every single penny I had saved. I called Rachel again, still no answer. By this point, I started to become concerned. Maybe she'd been in some kind of accident or something awful. But later that evening, when I finally got back to the house, I saw that her car wasn't parked outside, and a portion of her belongings were gone from our home. It wasn't everything, just a handful of possessions. I noticed her suitcase was gone, along with some clothes and her personal care items. That's when my anxiety morphed into something else entirely. I felt a rush of panic and rage, though I couldn't quite define it. My heart was thudding in my chest, my hands were trembling, and my brain was a whirlwind of unwelcome questions. Had she abandoned me? Was she facing some kind of danger? Why on earth would she take the money for my surgery? I felt like I was living in a nightmare. I tried calling her once more. This time the call went straight to her voicemail. I just sat there on the sofa for hours, just looking at the money that was missing from my account in my banking app, praying there was a reasonable explanation. Perhaps she'd needed the money in an emergency. Possibly she would call me to clear things up. I desperately wanted to believe that, but deep down I knew something was seriously wrong. The biggest piece of evidence arrived later that evening when I was checking our joint email account to see if I'd missed any bank notifications or messages. That's when I saw it. An email confirming a flight sent 2 days earlier. It was for a first-class trip to a tropical resort, departing the day before I was scheduled for surgery. The passenger's name? Rachel. Initially, I considered that it might be for a business trip. She does travel sometimes for work, and I tried to persuade myself that perhaps, just maybe, she had a last-minute work obligation and didn't have time to explain. I kept hopping. I really wanted to believe that I just overlooked the other person on the plane ticket. It was Ethan. I didn't know him at all. So I looked his name up online and I came across his LinkedIn. He was an old pal of Rachel's from school. My gut twisted again, but I wasn't prepared to jump to the worst possible conclusions. Perhaps he was a colleague. Perhaps they were traveling for their jobs. I kept trying to convince myself that there had to be a good reason. However, I then went to her Instagram page. There it was, a picture she shared just a little while after I'd been calling her endlessly. She was next to a swimming pool, holding a drink, wearing sunglasses I didn't recognize and a swimsuit I'd never seen. The caption said, "A much-needed getaway." And the person who took the photo, Ethan. He was identified in the picture. His account was private, but the profile picture was a photo of them together. I felt like I'd been hit hard. I couldn't catch my breath. My mind went blank. This was the same woman who held my hand at the doctor's office, who told me we were in this together, who said she'd be there for me after the operation. Now she was enjoying drinks with somebody else while I was home, figuring out how I would pay for a surgery I couldn't afford anymore. I would have preferred to be furious at that moment. But to be honest, I wasn't. I was devastated, utterly broken. I just kept asking myself, how could she do this to me? How could she take it all and leave me like this? I just gazed at that photo for ages, wishing it would vanish somehow. I was desperately hoping that this was all a colossal blunder of some kind. The very next day, I received a notification from my credit card provider. An unauthorized charge of $4,000 had been made at a swanky hotel located in the exact city where her flight was scheduled. I didn't have to wonder for a moment who was responsible. She had completely used up my card, and on top of that, she had cleaned out all of our savings. It was at that moment that I just lost it. This wasn't a simple mistake. It wasn't just a minor issue. She had orchestrated the whole thing. She had swiped everything from me, fully understanding what it all signified. She knew I needed that operation. She understood exactly what I was struggling with. And yet she made the choice to do this anyway. I haven't received a single word from her since. Not a single phone call or text. She's completely vanished from my life, and I have no clue what's going to happen next. For an update, I'm still struggling to comprehend the sheer scale of this betrayal. A couple of days after Rachel vanished, I received a message that took me completely by surprise. It was from Ethan, the guy she ran off with. Initially, I was convinced it was some kind of cruel joke. Why would he, the man my wife abandoned me for, be contacting me? I nearly didn't even bother to open the message, but my curiosity got the best of me. His message began with, "I had no idea she was married. I think we need to talk." I was completely stunned. No idea she was married. How could he possibly not know? My mind instantly began racing with questions. Was he trying to protect himself? Or had Rachel actually misled him as well? I carefully typed back, requesting that he clarify his statement. He revealed that Rachel had been involved with him for a lengthy period, precisely 8 months. They'd gotten back in touch on Instagram after she randomly showed interest in one of his pictures. She'd presented herself as unattached, recently divorced, and eager for a new chapter in her life. Based on his account, she'd fabricated this entire tale, playing the victim card and claiming I, her ex-husband, was domineering and manipulative, and she was now free to be her true self. I found it hard to process what I was reading. That evening, Ethan and I ended up having a conversation over the phone. Initially, I felt uncertain, but he presented himself as sincere and even upset. He confessed that he began to get a bad feeling when Rachel became secretive about parts of her life. For instance, she wouldn't introduce him to anyone in her circle of friends, and whenever the topic of her divorce came up, she would change the subject. But the breaking point for him was when she suddenly suggested this vacation and insisted on covering all the expenses. She claimed it was her gesture, because she had recently acquired some money from a family inheritance. That inheritance, needless to say, was the money meant for my surgery. Experiencing all of this felt like I was in a dream. I was incredibly angry at Rachel for deceiving him, but also at myself for not recognizing her true nature. The woman Ethan described didn't seem like the woman I had married, or possibly she was, and I had simply chosen to ignore it. During the next few days, I started to examine our financial affairs more closely. I was aware of the $15,000. She had cleaned out our shared bank account, yet a feeling inside me suggested there was more deception at play. And as it turned out, I was correct. I discovered she'd quietly acquired a credit card, using my name, several months prior. She'd been amassing charges on this card, the bulk of which were for extravagant goods like designer handbags and shoes, plus expensive restaurant meals. In total, she'd spent over $8,000 on that card, and I was totally oblivious, because she'd arranged for the statements to be sent to her private email address. This wasn't the extent of it, unfortunately. She'd also obtained a small personal loan, again in my name, amounting to $5,000. I felt absolutely dreadful. The woman I'd believed I knew so well, the woman I placed all my trust in, had been methodically stealing from me for nearly 12 months. And what was the purpose of all this? To finance her secret life. At this point, I couldn't cope with all of this alone. I contacted an attorney to start getting ready for a divorce. I didn't want to accept it, but it was clear that Rachel had been meticulously arranging her departure for a significant amount of time. She was not returning to me. The lawyer advised me that I needed to collect as much proof as I could, like bank records, electronic communications, and text exchanges, anything which could demonstrate the scale of her actions. That's precisely what I set about doing. Going through Rachel's personal laptop, which she conveniently left behind when she moved out, I found even more proof of her wrongdoing. There were emails between her and Ethan, in which she was lying about everything from our marriage to our financial situation, even her place of employment. She represented herself to him as being an executive at a marketing company. It was hard to believe, considering she hadn't worked for the past 12 months. She also mentioned that she hoped to relocate to a different city with him and make a fresh start, using the inheritance money as a down payment for a home. Reading the whole story was pretty awful, but I kept going since I needed every piece of information. The genuine turning point arrived when Ethan decided to have it out with Rachel. He mentioned that he intended to confront her, and although I was uncertain how it would go, I pushed him to reveal the truth from her. A couple of days after that, he called me, and the anger in his tone was evident. He said Rachel had admitted she had lied about practically everything. She came clean and said she was married, although she tried to diminish its significance, claiming her marriage was practically finished. And when he asked her about the money, she admitted it wasn't from an inheritance. The worst part, she didn't seem to care. Ethan said she basically brushed it off, stating that you don't get anywhere in life by staying cautious. He ended things with her right then and there and left the resort prematurely. A piece of me felt a sense of satisfaction knowing she'd been found out, but that didn't fix the harm she had caused. As the truth began to circulate, I decided to talk to some of Rachel's friends to see if they knew anything. Some of them conceded they had thought something was amiss but didn't want to get involved. One of her friends also told me that Rachel had been bad-mouthing me, saying I was too wrapped up in work and emotionally cold, and that cut deep because I had been putting in long hours. It's a real struggle to put aside enough money for the surgery, for our shared future. During all this, she was trying to make me out to be the villain to excuse her behavior. Her relatives weren't much better either. When I told her parents what had happened, they were taken aback, though not completely stunned. It seems Rachel had a pattern of making rash and self-centered choices, though nothing this serious before. Even her mother said to me, "I always feared she'd eventually do something like this." Great, thanks for the heads up. Currently, I'm in the process of untangling the financial disaster that Rachel created. Between the cash she stole, the deceptive credit card charges, and the personal loan, I'm facing a debt of tens of thousands of dollars. My attorney believes I can get some of the money back, but it's going to be a difficult, drawn-out fight. Regarding Rachel, she has vanished completely. She hasn't contacted me at all, and frankly, I don't want to hear from her. I don't believe there's anything she could say that would fix this situation. The person I thought she was just isn't real. One last thing. After discovering Rachel's financial dishonesty, I thought the worst I'd face was the $15,000 she took and the $8,000 she accumulated using a secret credit card opened in my name. But as my lawyer and I gathered all the evidence, we discovered something even more disturbing. Rachel had been steadily taking money out of my personal savings account for months. I hadn't realized it because I hardly ever used that account. That money I thought was just for true crises. She'd secretly withdrawn almost $20,000 bit by bit, so nobody would notice. The overall financial fallout she created was north of $40,000. I was totally stunned, completely caught off guard. How could someone I considered my partner, someone I shared my life with, not only hurt me deeply, but also leave me in a financial mess that could take years to fix? With my attorney's assistance, I started divorce proceedings and started the effort to get back the money she took. But the problem was this: Rachel was gone. She didn't answer my messages, calls, or emails, and from what I could gather, she wasn't with family or friends. It was as though she'd vanished into thin air. My lawyer said we had to formally give her the divorce papers to keep things moving, but finding her was tough. So I decided to bring in a private investigator to locate her. It seemed drastic, but at that moment I really didn't have another choice. The investigator learned that she was in another city, living in an Airbnb using a false identity. She was clearly hiding. When she was eventually served the paperwork, her reply was completely heartless. "Do whatever you want, I couldn't care less," she said. She also skipped the first court hearings, which held everything up even more. It seemed she just didn't care about the damage she'd done, both in terms of feelings and money. However, I was absolutely set on making her pay for it. I figured I should share my version of events with everyone involved, like our shared acquaintances, work colleagues, and even some members of her family. It felt like I had no choice, particularly because Rachel had been fabricating stories about me to try to excuse her behavior. I really wanted people to know the actual truth. So I put a comprehensive description of her actions on social media, complete with copies of text messages, emails, and proof of the money she'd swindled. My intention wasn't to be spiteful. I'll admit, though, that it did feel good. I did it because I wanted people to fully grasp the degree of hurt and deception I'd gone through. That social media post gained a lot of traction within our network of connections. The resulting public backlash was immediate. Rachel's standing took a major hit. People she'd thought were close friends distanced themselves. Even her family, who initially tried to stay out of it, abandoned her when they saw the hard evidence. I'm not happy about ruining someone's life, but frankly, she brought this on herself. Just when I thought it couldn't get more intense, Rachel contacted me. Following a period of months with no word from her, she sent me a lengthy, incoherent email. She said she'd made a mistake and wanted to discuss things. Initially, I didn't want to answer her. What possible explanation could she offer that would make what she did okay? But my curiosity won, and I decided to meet her somewhere public so I could hear what she had to say. When I saw her, I hardly knew who she was. She looked completely unkempt. It was like she'd been hiding out for a long time. She apologized for her actions, yet she instantly began to defend herself. She claimed she had felt like a prisoner in our relationship and needed an escape route. She confessed she had planned to run off with Ethan, but once he discovered the reality of her, he ended things with her. A bitter laugh escaped her as she said, "I guess I pushed my luck too far." She further revealed that she had used the last of the money she took on the Airbnb she was staying in. She had no money, no place to go, and was in a tough spot. A part of me felt sympathy for her, but then I recollected everything she had made me endure. I said I wanted nothing to do with her and just left. The breaking point came when I learned Rachel had tried to trick a friend into giving her money. She spun some tragic tale about how I had abandoned her and left her with nothing. Luckily, my friend recognized her dishonesty and told me about it right away. That was when I decided to do what had to be done. I returned to court and requested a restraining order against her. I didn't want her near me or anyone I loved. The judge approved it, and it felt like I had some command of my life again. With things calming down, I'm concentrating on reconstructing my life. The surgery I'd been waiting for is happening again because a family member assisted me. I also began going to therapy to sort through all of it. I'm not sure what became of Rachel, and frankly, it doesn't even matter to me. The woman I thought I'd committed myself to is gone. She was a complete fabrication, and so was everything connected to her.